Before we start, hit that subscribe to support the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is James Hartwell, and for 63 years I've carried a secret that has eaten away at my conscience like acid through steel. I'm 79 years old now, and the doctors tell me I have maybe 6 months left before this cancer takes me. But before I go, there's something the world needs to know about what really happened at Area 51 in 1947. Something so horrifying that it makes every conspiracy theory you've ever heard seem like children's bedtime stories. I wasn't supposed to be there. Hell, nobody was supposed to know what was happening in Level 3 of that godforsaken facility. But sometimes, fate puts you in the wrong place at the right time. Or maybe it was the right place at the wrong time. Either way, what I witnessed down there changed everything I thought I knew about human nature, about science, and about the price we pay for progress. You see, everyone thinks they know the story of Area 51. Secret aircraft testing, experimental weapons, maybe some crashed alien technology. The government lets those stories circulate because the truth is so much worse than fiction. The truth is that in 1947, when Operation Paperclip was bringing Nazi scientists to America, some of them didn't go to NASA or the weapons programs like everyone believes. Some of them went somewhere much darker, somewhere the American government could give them unlimited resources and zero oversight to continue work that even the Third Reich had considered too extreme. I was 19 years old in 1947, fresh out of basic training and assigned to what they called Special Security Detail at a classified installation in Nevada. They told us we'd be guarding experimental aircraft projects, that our job was to keep Soviet spies away from America's newest technological advantages. Standard Cold War paranoia stuff that made perfect sense to a kid from Kansas who'd grown up on stories about defeating the Nazis and protecting democracy. The facility looked normal enough from the outside. Concrete buildings, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, guard towers with searchlights that swept the desert perimeter every night. It could have been any military base in the middle of nowhere. But there were details that bothered me from day one. The scientists wore civilian clothes but moved with military precision. The officers who briefed us had accents I couldn't quite place. And there were sections of the base that were completely off-limits, even to security personnel with top-secret clearance. My first month passed without incident. I pulled 12-hour shifts, walking perimeters, checking identification badges, making sure nobody got too curious about things they weren't supposed to see. The work was boring, repetitive, exactly what you'd expect from guard duty at a research facility. But then I started noticing patterns that didn't add up. Supply trucks arrived at irregular intervals, always at night, always escorted by personnel who didn't interact with regular base staff. These trucks carried equipment I'd never seen before, devices that looked more like medical instruments than aircraft components. There were shipments of chemicals with German labels, crates marked with symbols that made my skin crawl just looking at them. And there were other deliveries, ones that came in refrigerated trucks and went directly to the restricted sections without any paperwork I could see. The breakthrough came during my second month when I was assigned to escort duty for a new arrival. Dr. Heinrich Müller was supposed to be an aeronautics engineer, but everything about him screamed medical professional. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, had surgeon's hands, and carried himself with the cold detachment of someone who'd spent years making life and death decisions. When he spoke English, his accent was thick enough that I could barely understand him, but when he thought nobody was listening, I heard him speaking rapid German with other personnel. It was Dr. Müller who inadvertently gave me access to Level 3. We were walking through the main laboratory building when he realized he'd forgotten some documents in his quarters. Protocol required that I accompany him, but when we reached his room, he discovered the documents weren't there either. He became agitated, muttering in German about important work that couldn't be delayed. Finally, he turned to me with desperation in his eyes and said he needed to retrieve materials from his real laboratory, the one in the restricted section. I should have refused. I should have followed protocol and reported the request to my superior officer. But Dr. Müller had authorization codes that opened doors I'd never seen unlocked, and he moved with such confidence that I assumed this was somehow legitimate. We took an elevator I didn't know existed. descending far deeper than any schematic had indicated the facility extended. When the doors opened on level 3, I stepped into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The corridor stretched ahead of us, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in stark, clinical white. But the smell hit me first, a combination of disinfectant and something else. Something organic and wrong that made my stomach turn. The walls were lined with observation windows, and through them I could see rooms that looked like operating theaters, complete with surgical tables, monitoring equipment, and instruments I couldn't identify. Dr. Miller moved quickly, focused entirely on retrieving whatever documents he needed. But I found myself slowing down, drawn by horrified fascination to peer through those windows. In the first room, I saw what appeared to be a standard medical examination in progress. A patient lay unconscious on a table, while technicians in white coats monitored various machines. Nothing unusual there, except for the fact that this was supposed to be an aircraft research facility, not a hospital. The second room made my blood run cold. The patient on the table wasn't entirely human anymore. Surgical modifications had been made to his skull, with metal ports and wiring running directly into exposed brain tissue. Monitoring equipment tracked neural activity while technicians made adjustments to the mechanical components. The man's eyes were open, but there was no consciousness behind them, just vacant staring at the ceiling while strangers rewired his mind. But it was the third room that broke something fundamental inside me. Multiple subjects lay on examination tables, all in various stages of surgical modification. Some had mechanical limbs grafted onto their bodies. Others had their rib cages open to reveal organs that had been replaced or augmented with artificial components. And in the center of the room stood a figure I recognized from newsreels and war crime tribunals. A man who should have been executed at Nuremberg instead of standing in an American government facility conducting experiments that made Mengele look like a country doctor. Dr. Miller finished gathering his documents and turned to leave. But he found me frozen in front of that third window, staring at horrors my 19-year-old mind couldn't process. His expression shifted from urgency to something that might have been sympathy, or possibly just clinical curiosity about my psychological reaction to what I was witnessing. He placed a hand on my shoulder and spoke quietly in heavily accented English. "You understand now, yes? This is not aircraft research. This is human research. We are perfecting techniques for enhancement, for improvement of the human condition. Your government, they bring us here because they understand the necessity of this work, even if others cannot." I wanted to run, to scream, to report what I'd seen to every authority I could find. But Dr. Miller's next words stopped me cold. "Of course, you realize that knowledge of this program is classified at levels requiring special clearance. Unauthorized disclosure would be considered treason during wartime conditions. The penalties for such actions are quite severe, particularly for young soldiers who might be mistaken for Soviet agents attempting to steal American secrets." The threat was crystal clear, but it was the casual way he delivered it that truly terrified me. This wasn't some panicked scientist trying to cover up an accident. This was a man who'd made similar threats before, who understood exactly how government machinery worked to eliminate inconvenient witnesses. I nodded numbly and followed him back to the elevator, my mind reeling from everything I'd witnessed. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake what I'd seen in level 3. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those modified faces, those vacant stares, those mechanical appendages grafted onto human bodies like spare parts on broken machinery. But what disturbed me even more was how normal everything seemed on the surface levels of the facility. Scientists went about their daily routines, guards pulled their shifts, administrative personnel filed their reports. The horror was hidden just beneath our feet, and everyone pretended it didn't exist. I started paying closer attention to the patterns around me. Those nighttime supply deliveries weren't bringing aircraft components. They were bringing test subjects. The refrigerated trucks carried bodies, some alive, some not, all destined for the operating tables 3 floors below ground level. I began recognizing the signs when new subjects arrived. increased activity in the restricted elevator, medical personnel working extended shifts, and always, the smell of disinfectant growing stronger throughout the facility. The subjects came from everywhere and nowhere. Some were prisoners transferred from military stockades, their records mysteriously altered to indicate death during transport. Others were vagrants and drifters who disappeared from nearby towns, people whose absence wouldn't be immediately noticed or investigated. But the most disturbing arrivals were the volunteers, men who'd been recruited through carefully worded advertisements promising medical treatment or employment opportunities. They signed consent forms they couldn't read, agreeing to procedures they couldn't understand, all in the name of advancing American scientific superiority. Dr. Mueller began acknowledging me during our encounters, offering brief nods and occasional comments about the weather or base conditions. But sometimes I caught him studying me with clinical interest, the same expression I'd seen him wear while observing surgical procedures. It was during one of these encounters that he made an observation that chilled me to the bone. "You are adapting well to the realities of your assignment," he said as we passed in a corridor. "Many young soldiers experience significant psychological distress when exposed to advanced research methodologies. But you demonstrate remarkable resilience. Perhaps you would be interested in observing our work more closely, learning about techniques that will define the future of human enhancement." I managed to decline politely, claiming I was satisfied with my current duties. But his invitation revealed something that kept me awake for days afterward. This wasn't just about hiding Nazi war criminals in American facilities. This was about creating a new generation of scientists and technicians who could continue their work, expand their research, perfect their techniques. They weren't just experimenting on unwilling subjects. They were recruiting willing participants in their vision of human improvement. The full scope of the program became clear when I accidentally accessed classified personnel files during a routine security check. The documents revealed the true purpose of Operation Paperclip's secret branch. While publicly the program brought Nazi scientists to America to develop rockets and weapons technology, the classified component focused on biological and psychological research. The goal wasn't just to gain technological advantages over the Soviet Union. The goal was to create enhanced human beings capable of surviving and thriving in a world where conventional warfare had become obsolete. The research built on work that had begun in concentration camps, experiments that had been considered too extreme even by Nazi standards. But here, with unlimited funding and no ethical oversight, those same researchers could push boundaries that had previously been unthinkable. They were creating super soldiers, enhanced intelligence operatives, and biological weapons that could transform warfare itself. And they were doing it with full knowledge and support of the American government. I discovered that Level 3 was only the beginning. The facility extended much deeper underground, with additional levels dedicated to different aspects of human enhancement research. Level 4 focused on psychological conditioning and mind control techniques. Level 5 housed genetic modification experiments. Level 6 contained what the documents referred to as integration protocols, procedures that combined biological, mechanical, and chemical enhancement methods into comprehensive human upgrade packages. The success rate was horrifyingly low. For every subject who survived the enhancement procedures, dozens died on operating tables or succumbed to complications during recovery. But the researchers viewed these casualties as acceptable losses, necessary sacrifices in pursuit of evolutionary advancement. They maintained detailed records of every procedure, every failure, every marginal success, building a database of human experimentation that dwarfed anything conducted during the war. What made everything worse was the enthusiasm of the American personnel involved in the program. These weren't reluctant participants following orders against their better judgment. These were scientists, doctors, and military officers who genuinely believed they were advancing human civilization. They saw themselves as pioneers pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be human, explorers mapping territories that would define humanity's future. Their dedication to the work was absolute, their commitment unwavering, their moral flexibility seemingly infinite. The breaking point came when I recognized one of the test subjects being wheeled into Level 3. Tommy Morrison had been in my unit during basic training, a kid from Detroit who joined the Army to escape poverty and build a better life for his family. According to his official records, Tommy had died in a training accident 2 weeks earlier. But there he was, unconscious and strapped to a gurney, being prepared for procedures that would either kill him or transform him into something that was no longer entirely human. I tried to intervene, claiming I needed to verify his identity for security purposes. But the medical technicians had authorization that superseded my clearance level. I could only watch helplessly as they wheeled Tommy through those doors, knowing I'd probably never see him again, at least not in any form I'd recognize. That night, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I was going to document everything, gather evidence, and find a way to expose what was happening in those underground levels. But gathering evidence in a facility designed around absolute secrecy proved nearly impossible. Every document was classified, every photograph required special authorization, every conversation was monitored by security personnel. The researchers had created a perfect closed system where information flowed in only one direction, where questions were discouraged, where curiosity was treated as a security risk. The surveillance was more sophisticated than anything I'd encountered, even in high-security military installations. Hidden cameras tracked movement through every corridor. Microphones recorded conversations in supposedly private areas, and personnel files were updated with psychological evaluations based on behavioral observations. Everyone was watching everyone else, creating an atmosphere of paranoia that kept people isolated and compliant. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Heinrich Weber, one of the younger German scientists, had been struggling with what he called moral complications regarding the research protocols. Unlike the older researchers who seemed completely committed to their work, Weber retained enough conscience to question what they were doing to human subjects. During a late-night encounter in the facility's small library, he confided his growing doubts about the ethical implications of their experiments. Weber revealed details that made my stomach turn. The enhancement procedures weren't just about creating superior soldiers or intelligence operatives. They were testing theories about human consciousness itself, attempting to isolate and manipulate the components that made people individual, unique, fundamentally human. Some experiments focused on memory transfer, trying to download knowledge and skills from one person and implant them in another. Other procedures involved consciousness splitting, attempting to create multiple personalities within a single enhanced subject. The psychological conditioning programs were particularly disturbing. Subjects underwent months of sensory deprivation, drug-induced hallucinations, and electromagnetic stimulation designed to break down existing personality structures and rebuild them according to predetermined specifications. The goal was creating individuals who retained human intelligence and capabilities, but operated with machine-like obedience and efficiency. They were manufacturing people who could think and reason but couldn't question or resist. Weber showed me photographs he'd taken secretly, images that documented the progression of enhancement procedures on specific subjects. The before pictures showed normal human beings, people with families and dreams and futures ahead of them. The after pictures revealed something else entirely, beings that maintained human appearance but had lost something essential, some spark that made them recognizably alive. Their eyes held intelligence but no curiosity, awareness but no emotion, consciousness but no soul. The genetic modification experiments were advancing rapidly, building on research that had begun in German concentration camps, but now had access to resources that defied imagination. Scientists were altering DNA sequences to enhance physical strength, improve sensory capabilities, and extend natural lifespan. Some subjects developed enhanced night vision that allowed them to see clearly in complete darkness. Others gained muscular density that made them capable of superhuman feats of strength. Still others showed improved healing rates that allowed rapid recovery from injuries that should have been fatal. But the modifications came with costs that the researchers either ignored or considered acceptable trade-offs. Enhanced physical capabilities often resulted in shortened lifespans as subjects' bodies burned through energy at unsustainable rates. Improved sensory perception frequently caused psychological breakdown as individuals became overwhelmed by stimuli their brains couldn't process. Genetic alterations sometimes triggered cascading failures throughout biological systems, causing subjects to deteriorate rapidly and die in agony. The integration protocols on Level 6 represented the culmination of all research programs, combining biological, mechanical, and chemical enhancements into comprehensive transformation packages. Subjects underwent sequential procedures over periods lasting months, each step building on previous modifications to create beings that transcended traditional human limitations. These integrated subjects could operate without sleep for weeks, process information at superhuman speeds, and survive environmental conditions that would kill normal humans. Weber described observing integration subjects during training exercises that tested their enhanced capabilities. They moved with inhuman precision, communicated through methods that bypassed normal speech, and demonstrated problem-solving abilities that seemed almost supernatural. But they also showed complete emotional detachment, treating human casualties during training with the same indifference they showed toward broken equipment. The enhancement process had successfully removed empathy, compassion, and moral consideration from their psychological makeup. The most successful integration subjects were being prepared for deployment in classified operations around the world. Their enhanced capabilities made them perfect for espionage, assassination, and psychological warfare missions that required superhuman abilities combined with absolute loyalty. These beings could infiltrate enemy organizations, eliminate targets without leaving evidence, and gather intelligence through methods that conventional operatives couldn't employ. Weber's revelations about the program's ultimate goals chilled me more than anything I'd witnessed in the underground levels. This wasn't just about creating enhanced soldiers for military applications. This was about transforming humanity itself, replacing natural human beings with improved versions that would be stronger, smarter, and more obedient. The researchers viewed normal humans as obsolete, evolutionary dead ends that needed to be upgraded or replaced to ensure species survival. The program had support from the highest levels of American government, with funding that came from black budget allocations that never appeared in official documentation. Military leaders, intelligence officials, and political figures understood they were participating in human experimentation that violated every ethical principle. But they justified these actions as necessary for national security. The Cold War provided perfect cover for research that would have been impossible during peacetime. Weber revealed that similar facilities were operating in other locations across the United States, each focusing on different aspects of human enhancement research. Some specialized in psychological conditioning, others concentrated on genetic modification, and still others developed mechanical augmentation technologies. The program represented a coordinated effort to revolutionize human capabilities across multiple disciplines simultaneously. The recruitment methods for obtaining test subjects had become increasingly sophisticated over the years. Military personnel were selected based on psychological profiles that indicated adaptability to enhancement procedures. Civilian subjects were acquired through carefully orchestrated disappearances that left no investigative trails. Some volunteers were recruited through medical clinics that promised experimental treatments for terminal conditions, never explaining the true nature of the procedures they would undergo. Weber showed me documentation revealing the international scope of the research program. German scientists weren't the only foreign nationals involved in the work. The facility also employed researchers from Japan, specialists who brought expertise in biological warfare and psychological manipulation techniques developed during their own wartime experiments. These international collaborations were creating knowledge bases that no single nation could have achieved independently. The psychological effects on facility personnel were becoming increasingly apparent as the program expanded. Many researchers showed signs of moral dissociation, developing the ability to compartmentalize their work so thoroughly that they could conduct horrific experiments during the day and return to normal family lives in the evening. Others embraced their role completely, viewing themselves as pioneers advancing human evolution regardless of the cost in individual suffering. Weber confided that he'd been documenting everything, gathering evidence that he hoped to smuggle out of the facility and deliver to authorities who might be able to stop the program. But he discovered that oversight of the research extended far beyond the military chain of command. Congressional leaders, Supreme Court justices, and even presidents had been briefed on the enhancement research and had provided authorization for its continuation. The scope of government complicity meant that traditional channels for reporting abuse were useless. Everyone who might have authority to shut down the program was either directly involved in its operation or had been convinced that it represented essential national security research. Weber realized that exposing the truth would require going outside official channels entirely, reaching journalists or international organizations that might be able to bring public pressure to bear. But Weber never got the chance to act on his plans. 3 days after our conversation in the library, he was found dead in his quarters, apparently the victim of a heart attack brought on by stress and overwork. The medical examination was perfunctory. The death certificate was signed without autopsy, and Weber's personal effects were confiscated as potential security risks. His disappearance from the program was explained as a transfer to another classified facility, and within a week, it was as if he'd never existed. Weber's death convinced me that anyone who threatened the program's security would be eliminated quickly and efficiently. The researchers had no qualms about killing their own colleagues if those individuals posed risks to the operation's continuation. My own knowledge of the facility's true purpose made me a potential threat, and I began to understand that my survival depended on maintaining absolute silence about everything I'd witnessed. The paranoia that gripped me during those final weeks at the facility was overwhelming. Every conversation felt monitored. Every action seemed scrutinized. Every casual interaction carried the potential for fatal misinterpretation. I found myself avoiding contact with other personnel, speaking only when directly addressed, keeping my expressions carefully neutral to avoid suggesting any emotional response to the horrors surrounding me. But isolation brought its own dangers. Personnel who withdrew from social interaction were flagged as potential security risks and subjected to enhanced psychological evaluation. The facility's mental health professionals were skilled at identifying individuals who might be struggling with moral conflicts about the research program. These evaluations often led to reassignment, medical leave, or in some cases, integration into the enhancement program itself as test subjects. That's my story. That's what really happened at Area 51 in 1947 and what continued happening for years afterward. The horrors I witnessed in Level 3 were just the beginning of a program that transformed human beings into something else entirely. I've carried this burden for over 6 decades, watching as the world moved forward without knowing the price that was paid for progress in those underground laboratories. Now that I'm dying, I needed to tell someone. Needed to ensure that the truth survived, even if I didn't. Whatever you choose to believe about my testimony, remember this. Sometimes the most unthinkable conspiracy theories are just the tip of an iceberg that goes much deeper than anyone wants to imagine.